Hey guys, so today we are going to continue working on the Pearl Harbor DBQ assignment. In yesterday's video, we covered documents A and document B, or if you were in class yesterday, we got through as much of document A and document B as we could. So today we are going to focus on the next two documents, document C and document D. Okay. Document E, we are going to be saving for next Tuesday, so that's not something that you need to do at this point. Okay, so starting with document C, and again, just a reminder, our goal of these documents is to be able to answer the question, why did Japan attack the United States? Okay, so document C here is a timeline starting in 1932 and going all the way up until the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Okay, so this is something that's been adapted from my book. So this is what we are going to be focusing on for the questions that are below. Okay, so just to kind of go through what was going on here. Okay, in 1932, Japan begins to, or completes its occupation of Manchuria, which will be renamed Manchukuo once it is under Japanese control. Okay, in 1937, Japan attacks the rest of China. China is in the middle of the Civil War at this time, so they're very vulnerable, and Japan decides to take advantage of that. Japan declares a policy to establish a new order in East Asia. And if you remember from yesterday, document A, we talked about the new order being a new system of control in the world, where the East Asian countries, specifically Japan, would be the ones that were going to control the world, as opposed to the old order, which was controlled by European nations and the United States. Okay, so that idea is established in 1938. In 1939, the U.S. begins an embargo, all right, meaning they're going to stop trading airplanes and airplane parts to Japan. Okay, in May of 1940, President Roosevelt, he moves the U.S. Pacific Fleet from California to Pearl Harbor, getting it closer to Japan. All right, this is a good chunk of the American Navy. Okay, in July, Congress passes the Naval Expansion Act, which triples the size of the American Navy by 1944. Right? In 1941, July of 1941, the U.S. freezes all Japanese assets and bank accounts, meaning any money that Japan has in American banks, they cannot access. Any property that Japan has in the United States, they can't sell. Okay, so they are losing out on quite a bit of money here. Okay, and then August of 1941, the U.S. further embargoes Japan, specifically on oil this time. Right, oil is something that's going to be incredibly important to an industrial country like Japan, especially one that is using a big military. Okay, and then in December of 1941, Japan will eventually attack Pearl Harbor. Okay, so that's the timeline we're dealing with. So let's take a look at these questions down here and see if this is going to help us answer our question about why Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. So number one says, how many years was it between Japan's attack on China and Pearl Harbor? Okay, so if we look back up here, Japan attacks China in 1937. Japan attacks Pearl Harbor in 1941. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, looks like 4 years. All right, there are 4 years between the two attacks. Okay, so 4 years between the attack on China and the attack on Pearl Harbor. Okay. Number two, we kind of already talked about, what is the new order that Japan announced in 1938? And again, that's something that we can kind of revisit here. Okay, this is something that the world, or at least Asia, right? This is where Japan sees itself as the country that will control at least Asia. All right, you can maybe make an argument that eventually the world, but at least starting with Asia. Okay. So that, again, that idea that Japan was going to control the rest of Asia, which is the biggest continent in the world, okay, it starts in 1938. Okay, and what evidence is there in 1939 and 1940 that the United States did not like this idea of this new order? Okay, so what happened in 1939 to 1940 that the U.S. did that kind of is like, that the U.S. kind of seems like they're trying to stop it. Okay, well, first of all, in 1939, only one thing was of note, and this was an embargo, right? So, so in 1939, the U.S. Places an embargo of aircraft and aircraft parts on Japan. Okay. And then in 1940, it has to do with the U.S. Navy, where we not only move it to Hawaii, but we also triple the size of it, right? And in 1940, we move our Navy closer to Japan while tripling its size. Okay, and again, the tripling of the size is going to be passed in 1940, but it won't actually be accomplished until 1944. Okay, obviously, they need time to build the ships and things like that. Okay, so we are doing, it seems like the United States is doing a few things to kind of slow Japan down a little bit, right? We're cutting off some of their supplies. We are, sending our own Navy closer and making our Navy bigger to maybe warn Japan a little bit, like, hey, we're ready to stop you if we need to. Okay. Number 4 says, what does it mean to freeze assets and bank accounts? And we kind of talked a little bit about that already, but this simply means that Japan cannot access money or property it has in the U.S. Okay, so any money that's in American banks, they can't get to. Any property, they can't sell any property to try to make money that way if it's in the United States. Okay. Number 5 says, from the context clues, what is an embargo? Well, they actually give us the definition of an embargo here. All right, and we see a couple different embargoes, one on aircraft parts and aircraft in general, and then another one on oil. So an embargo is, when we stop trading certain goods, right? When we stop trading certain goods to certain places. All right, in this case, again, it was aircraft parts, oil, and to Japan. Okay. So judging by this timeline, why do you think Japan attacked Pearl Harbor? Okay, so again, it seems like Japan, at least early on here, in these first 3 dates, it tells us that Japan is becoming increasingly aggressive. They take over Manchuria, they attack China, they decide that they're going to be the ones that control all of Asia. So the U.S. is kind of starting to get a little nervous about this, right? And they do some things to try to slow them down. Okay, so the U.S. took action against Japan's aggression, right? They embargoed certain materials, they moved their navy. Okay? So the U.S. took action against Japan's aggression, and Japan, they did not appreciate that. Okay? They were worried that, well, the United States is trying to stop us from doing what we want. So if we can take them out, if we can take out that navy that they have, then there's no one left to stop us. Okay? Then we can, make sure that our new order plans are carried out. Okay. So moving on to document D here. This is a chart that has to do with imports and exports of Japan. Okay. Now, just a reminder, an import is something a country brings into their country from someplace else. Okay? An export is something that a country sends to another country. So for example, if we were selling oil to Japan, for Japan, oil would be an import. They're bringing it in from another country. For the United States, it would be an export where we are sending it to another country. Okay, so this chart here has to do with imports in Japan from 1937 to 1941 of petroleum, which is oil, steel, okay, and then scrap iron. All right, just another type of metal. Okay, so just a little note here at the bottom of this chart is that Japan has very few oil reserves, so they don't actually have a whole lot of their own oil, so they have to buy a lot of it. Okay, they have to buy a lot of it from other countries. Okay, so our first question here is what is an import? Right, and I kind of just explained that to you, but an import is a good that is brought into a country. An import is a good brought into a country. Okay, so by the late 1930s, Japan is importing a lot of oil from the United States, right, which is the petroleum. Okay, actually, I'm going to make a little note of that. All right, this is another word for oil here. Okay, so petroleum here, there's a really good amount of their oil being brought into Japan from the U.S. Okay, so I'm gonna pull up a calculator here, and I'll do the math over here to the side. So we're trying to figure out what percentage of the oil came from the United States. So if we take the number 380, we'll start with 1937. All right, we'll take 380 divided by 482. All right, and we do that math. I'm going to do it on a calculator here. All right, so 482. All right, that actually comes out to be 79% of the oil in 1937. Okay, let's try another year just to see, because our choices here are 10, 20, 50, or 80%. Okay, right now it looks like it's closer to 80%. Okay, but let's do another year just to make sure that it's staying consistent. So let's go with 316 divided by 392. See what that equals. So again, I'll do it on my calculator here. 316 divided by 392, and that actually equals 81%. So I think it's pretty clear which of these numbers is going to be correct. So I'm going to use my shapes here, right? And you can do a little circle. I'm going to circle 80%, or if you just want to type 80% next to the line, that's fine as well. Okay, but 80% of Japan's oil is coming from the United States. So when the United States cuts off their oil, it's going to be really devastating to Japan. Okay, so looking at the map on document B. Okay, so we're going to be kind of referring back to this map here. All right, looking at the map, document B map. Why would Japanese leaders be interested in keeping up the flow of imported oil? Okay. Well, again, Japan is an island, right? So they have to, anytime they want to get somewhere, they have to go by boat, whether it's Manchuria, whether it's China, whether it's they're controlling Taiwan, right? If they want to get anywhere, they have to go by boat. And boats require oil to run. They require petroleum to run. Okay? And we see that there's not a whole lot of oil. Japan does not have its own oil. Okay. In fact, if they want to get their own oil, they're going to have to come all the way down here to the Netherlands East Indies, all right, to get their own oil. All right, they're going to eventually take this place over, okay, because they have oil here. Okay, but at the time, okay, Japan wants to keep up this flow of oil because they don't have a whole lot of their own. So Japan requires a lot of oil to operate their navy and factories. Right, operate their navy and factories. Right. They also don't have much of their own oil, so they need to import it. And if they stop importing that oil, they're going to be in trouble. They're not going to be able to run their Navy anymore. Okay. So number 4 here is talking about when they stop trading with them, when the United States stops trading with them. All right, the U.S. stopped all trade of oil, steel, and scrap iron with Japan on August 1st, 1941. There's evidence that President Franklin Roosevelt was worried about cutting off all oil to Japan. What might have been his concern? Okay, so again, we're going to look at this map real quick. Okay, if we stop trading with Japan, right, they're still going to need oil, right? They still need oil, whether or not we're trading with them or not. They still need it. So if they're not getting it from us, they're going to have to find out a different way to get oil. So if we stop trading with them, that might make them want to take over this area down here. All right, because this has a lot of oil in the Netherlands East Indies. All right, today it's known as Indonesia. Okay, but if we don't give them the oil, they're gonna have to get it from somewhere else, and somewhere else is going to be the Dutch East Indies down here. So that's going to actually push them to further expand their territory. Okay, so President Roosevelt was worried that Japan might attack the Dutch East Indies in order to continue their oil. All right, and President Roosevelt would actually be correct on this. They would eventually take over the Dutch East Indies in early 1942. Okay, so he was definitely correct being worried about this, because this does end up happening. Again, they go down here and they continue to expand, and they take over the Dutch East Indies to get their oil back. All right, so that should wrap up document C and document D here. Again, next week we will work on document E. That is not something that you have to do at this moment.